Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is respectable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is worthy of outstanding recognition, think about such things. I could ask, who are the people that come to mind when you hear that list? I like to think that these are our heroes. We all have heroes. We select people that inspire us, people we admire. We have lists of people who we look at, and they set the bar for us. They set the standard through their accomplishments or through their behavior. Some of them have celebrity, some of them have fame, some of them have great success. Others are heroes only we know about. Heroes that come in all different shapes and sizes, sports heroes and historical heroes, even political heroes. But these are the people who we admire, people who inspire us. For a lot of years, and I'm kind of realizing that I'm making an admission of some really strange behavior, but for probably close to 30 years, I used to keep a 3x5 card in my office. And every once in a while, I would update the names on this 3x5 card, and I don't know why I kept it for so long, but they were names of people that I wanted to meet and have dinner with. And these were famous people, and as long as they were alive, they couldn't be historical figures. I know this is kind of weird, isn't it? But I had this list, and from time to time, it would have 10 to 12 names on it. And for many years, for the better part of 20 years, there were two names at the top of the list. Two people, if I could have dinner with anyone, I wanted to have dinner, first of all, with Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. I thought that would be an amazing person to meet and talk and just have dinner with. And the other was one of my personal heroes, Tom Landry. Tom Landry was the first person that I ever heard of. When I came to faith as a teenager at 18 years old, Tom Landry was the first celebrity who expressed his faith in the same way that I was experiencing it. And so at that time, living in Philadelphia, I became a Dallas Cowboys fan because of Tom Landry. When we eventually moved to Dallas, I was a lifelong Cowboys fan, have been a lifelong Cowboys fan, even though the last 20 years or so have been filled with grief and pain. But I was a Cowboys fan because of Tom Landry. On that list, I had some very interesting people. There was a group of men who I called the Chin Beards. One of them was the Surgeon General of the United States, a pediatric surgeon from Philadelphia named C. Everett Koop. I had heard him speak a couple times, and I thought he'd be interesting to have dinner with. Another one was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the man who wrote the Gulag Archipelago. I thought he was brilliant and a revolutionary in his own way. And the third one was Francis Schaeffer, the Christian philosopher. And they all had chin beards, so I thought maybe I would have a chin beard dinner with these three very interesting fellows. But these were the people who I thought, they've accomplished so much. They're so brilliant, or they have so much to offer. I would love to have time with them. I considered them in my category as heroes. My prayer today, as we come to the end of this conversation about Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, this single sentence that it kind of lays the groundwork, forms the foundation for kind of a checklist for heroes. It's an instruction in how to think when we don't know what to think. It's an invitation to be inspired, to admire. And my prayer today is not just that we would see this checklist and think, okay, these are some things that I would like to be or things that I admire in others. There's something more going on. And my prayer today is that we would understand the significance of that. You see, it's very easy to take Philippians 4:8 and turn it into a starter kit for heroes. That these are the attributes of generally considerable heroic people. People that we would consider to be inspiring and people who leave us with a sense of admiration. People who are truthful and people who are respectable and people who are righteous and people who are pure and people who are beautiful and people who are admirable and people who are worthy of our recognition. It's the seventh term, it's the final term, where it says, if anything is worthy of outstanding recognition, if anything is worthy of being considered heroic, if there is anything about a person that is worth being put on a pedestal, these are the things that we should think about. The words literally there mean, if there's anything that is perfectly praiseworthy, that is well beyond the average, that kind of sets the standard for us. These are the things that we should aspire to, be inspired by. Along with my list of the dozen or so people that I always wanted to meet and have dinner with, I had an imaginary hall of heroes. There were a variety of people, countless numbers of people who I believed inspired me, who stood out as heroic from my point of view, and some of them are historical figures of great influence. They stand on tall pedestals with their full-figured form and all of their glory and all of their influence. And some of them are people that I've met. Some of them are some of you, some of my friends, some of my acquaintances, some people who I have observed, even people I've gotten to know. In this hall of heroes, I have these great statues of these historical, influential people, but I also have perhaps little trophies, little bobbleheads or plaques on the wall for those momentary heroes, people who showed up heroically in a moment. Like a guy, in the weeks before I got married, I was working in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and driving every day back and forth from our farm, and it was about a 25-mile drive, and most of it was on rural country roads. And I had worked late one evening, and about 9 or 10 o'clock I was driving home, and I got about halfway home and completely ran out of gas on a country road in the middle of nowhere. I also didn't have any money. And so I'm sitting there, I'm trying to decide what to do, and I pushed my car to the top of a hill, and I jumped in, and I coasted down, and I coasted as far as I could, and I wound up just outside of this small hamlet there, this little town outside of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and there was one building with lights on. It was a bar, and there were half a dozen trucks outside, so I walked in, and I asked if anyone knew where I could get some gas. They all just kind of laughed at me, and all of a sudden, one guy just stood up. And he waved at me and motioned me out of the bar. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but what did I have to lose? And he said, "Where's your car?" I said, "Well, it's up the road a ways." And he said, "Get in." And I got in his pickup truck, and he drove me back to his car. And without saying a word, he got out, pulled a 5-gallon can of gas out of the bed of his pickup truck, poured it into my car. I said, I don't have any money. He said, "Don't worry about it." Got in his truck and drove off. Never knew his name, never knew anything about him, but he's in my Hall of Heroes. There's a group of guys in my Hall of Heroes whose names I never knew. I met them on a ski trip. I was skiing with some friends in Steamboat, Colorado. It was the spring of the year 2000. And it just so happened that in Steamboat, Colorado, they were having the national ski competition for policemen and firefighters. And I spent the better part of a day skiing with a group of policemen and firefighters from New York City. And they were a hoot. They were catastrophic on the ski slopes. They believed in full contact skiing with each other. They were hilarious. We get on the lifts and they're like, yo, who are we going to take out on the way down? I don't know, but I think it's your turn. And they were just telling me stories about what it was like to be a first responder in New York City. It was about 18 months later on September 1st, 2001. Even though I didn't remember any of their names and I knew none of their stories, I wondered how many of them had perished that day. All of them probably knew people who did, and they have anonymous trophies in that Hall of Heroes. There's a hero in that Hall of Heroes of mine, a guy named Andy Olson. Andy Olson was a senior citizen who was a member of the church where I first entered into ministry. I was a volunteer youth pastor, and he was in the service, the first sermon I ever preached. And my parents were there, and my future in-laws were there, and there were family members there, and they were all very complimentary. But it was Andy Olson who came up to me with tears in his eyes. And he said, I see God in you. And I will look forward to being the person who tells anyone who asks, yes, I was there, for his first sermon. And his affirmation and his belief in me has stuck with me for over 40 years. And he's one of the heroes in that Hall of Heroes of my life. In that Hall of Heroes are friends and family members, those who are famous and those who no one would ever recognize. But at the center of that room, there is a special group of heroes reserved for my close friends and for my family. And in among those pedestals and in that Hall of Heroes are tributes to my siblings, my brother and my sister. I have two younger siblings. I have a sister named Carol and a brother named Peter. My sister Carol is 13 months younger than I am. And I don't know if any of you have studied birth order and the psychological theories of how birth order works in a family. Well, we were a family of three, and I'm a big fan of the birth order. You have firstborn behaviors and middle child behaviors and then youngest child behaviors. And my sister was the middle child. She was in between myself and my younger brother, but she apparently didn't get the memo. She behaved just like a firstborn. I mean, my sister, my younger sister, Carol, is 6 feet tall. She has a Mensa level IQ and a PhD and a bad attitude. This is a woman who takes no prisoners in her life. You know, the odd thing is, my oldest daughter, Kaya, is her personality doppelganger. I don't know how that happened, but my sister thought she was the oldest in the family, and her mission in life was to put me in my place. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with how family dynamics work, but that didn't go over real well with me. So we were at war for the better part of 2 decades. As a young family, my sister and I were constantly in various forms of combat. And I just might have a footnote. For those of you who are pocket parents, and by pocket parents I mean you had your kids in a group because you thought that would be a good idea. Let's have our kids within a year or two of each other. So there was a season in your life where all your children were preschoolers, and then all your children were elementary school students, and all your children were middle schoolers, and all your children were high schoolers, and then all your children were in college, and you had no money and no life. I have good news for you. You will get through it. You will survive. My parents somehow survived this civil war that was going on between my sister and I, because it was relentless. I mean, she had the ability to push my buttons to this day. She can do something, say something, and I love my sister, but she could just... Maybe I'm the only person that has a family member like that. I remember when we were probably 8 or 10 years old, and we were out playing in the snow behind the house, and she did something or said something that set me off. It didn't take much. She was about 20 yards away from me, and I just took off after her. I was going to bury her in the snow. And she got to the house before I did, and she ran in through the back door, and the back door of our house had these louvered glass things in it, you know. And she came in and locked the door, and she's back there taunting me. Well, I had mittens on, so I punched her right through the glass window. Not really smart at all, because there was a screen, so I never hit her. I just broke the glass in the window, which I had to pay for, and I was grounded, and all of the punishment came down. She won that round. But that was the reality of my relationship with my sister. My brother, Peter, is 6 years younger than I am. And from the day that he was born, his life was a struggle. See, he was born with a congenital heart defect. I didn't know what that meant. We didn't know at the time. My parents said he had a hole in his heart. And there was no corrective surgery at the time. He was 10 years old before he went into New York City. And at the time, he was the second youngest child in America to have what they had called open heart surgery to repair the hole in his heart. Over the course of his lifetime, he's had more major surgeries than I've had visits to the hospital. He's had back surgery, had his spleen removed. In fact, the earlier part of this year, before COVID, my brother was in the ICU and he was dying, and none of the doctors could figure out why. His blood count was dropping, and they were running a bunch of tests, and every day he got worse and worse, and then one day they gave him some drugs and he got better, and they still don't know what was going on. That was his life. His life has been this series of relentless challenges. But not only that, he was the pawn in the civil war between my sister and I. If he was on her side, I was against him. If he was on my side, my sister was against him. He grew up with no peace. He grew up in conflict, and it kind of shaped his personality. And for some reason, I was his hero. He would walk around and he would say, "Dave, what are we going to do?" He was always bugging me. And I was always throwing him around and telling him to go away. And I remember I brought a girl home to meet my family for the first time. And we were sitting on the sofa in our living room. We were just sitting there. And all of a sudden, my brother Pete, like a ninja, comes flying across the living room and tackles me from behind. And I did the appropriate thing. I lifted his body up and I slammed him down on the ground, and then I dove on top of him with my head, and I drove him into the ground like a WWE fighter, and I got up and I said, "Stay down!" I sat down next to her. She married me anyway. She's sitting right there. She can tell you that story. This was my relationship with my brother. When I got married, when Diane and I got married, he was the best man in my wedding. He was still in high school at the time, and he finished high school and then went to college in Philadelphia. We moved to Dallas so I could be closer to Tom Landry. And I began my ministry there in Richardson, Texas. And after he graduated from college, he said, I want to move down and I want to work in your church. And I said, "Church is too small. We can't hire you. We can't give you a job." He said, "No, I just want to come and help. You don't have to pay me." I got him a job working as a bicycle courier in downtown Dallas, and he spent all of his free time working with the students in our little church in Richardson. He also got involved in a thing called Young Life. Have you ever heard of Young Life? He was involved in the Richardson area club in Young Life. They had a super program. 200-300 kids every week would come, and Pete was heavily involved with them. And all of this, he volunteered. After he had lived in Dallas for 3 or 4 years, he came and he said, I'm taking a leave of absence from work. I'm going to go on summer staff with Young Life at a camp in Northern California called Woodleaf. And Pete then packed his stuff in his car and he drove up to Northern California, up to the Sierras, up to Lake Tahoe to spend the summer there, and he never came back. He stayed there for 20 years. He worked in the camp as as just a handyman, as a guy who did whatever needed to be done. He lived in basements and in attics and in ramshackle trailers on the property. He barely made any money. And in case you're wondering, when you're a young single man and you move to the woods of Northern California, there's not a lot of dating opportunities. Tinder takes on a whole different meaning in the woods of Northern California. I said, Pete, have you met any women? And he said, yes, but they all have beards. And I said, okay, that's a deal breaker right there. And so Pete labored for 20 years as a staff person there in the woods of Young Life, serving the hundreds and thousands of students who would come through that camp and serving the families that lived on the property and that worked there as counselors and as operations people in the camp. And Pete did whatever needed to be done. In fact, in the middle of his tenure there, he was accused of inappropriate behavior with a child. And none of us believe that that was possible, but you understand how that works. When that accusation comes down, you're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And so for the better part of a year, he had to work away from the students that he cared about and from the families that worked on the property. He had to kind of sequester himself, and he did it without complaining. He knew he was innocent. Every time we talked on the phone, he would wrestle with it, but he never threw anyone under the bus. He never blamed anyone else. He just said, I'm trying to learn what God has for me in this season. After 13 months, a judge said, we can find no evidence to substantiate this accusation. And CPS had investigated him, and social workers had interviewed him, and the sheriff's department had run every kind of check. I don't know how many of you could survive that, but he came through it. And they basically said, you're innocent, you're free to go. And he was reinstated in his position, and the director of Young Life came to the camp, and he sat Pete down, and he had a manila folder about 1.5 inches thick. And he said, these are the cards and the letters and the notes we got from people willing to testify to your character. All of these people were willing to stand up for you. After he had been at Young Life at Woodley for 20 years, Young Life came to him and it said, we are expanding our ministry in Asia, and we need your administrative help. Would you be willing to become an administrator with Young Life Asia? Pete didn't even eat Asian food. He had never been further west than San Francisco, but he said, yeah, okay, I'll do whatever you need me to do. And he became an administrator with Young Life Asia and started traveling halfway around the world on a regular basis. And in order to orient himself to the culture that he was serving, he became a member of a Filipino church in San Francisco. Pretty soon the people there realized what a valuable asset Pete was, and they began to invite him into their homes and into their families. And one day, a family at the church introduced them to a new member of their church, a young widow who had twin daughters. And she was having problems in her home, and Pete said, well, I can help you out with that. I can, fix your garbage disposal. I can change the oil in your car. I can do whatever you might need just to serve her. And for 3 years, they became friends. After 3 years, they actually started a dating relationship. After they had known each other for over 5 years, my 55-year-old brother got married for the first time to a beautiful Filipino woman named Gina. I have a new sister-in-law, and I have 2 amazing nieces, Giselle and Rochelle. And my brother has a beautiful bride. See, my brother is my hero. He's my hero, and I could not be more proud of my brother, not because he's famous, but because he exchanged the opportunity for any celebrity to display his character. He inspires me. I aspire to be like him. In that room, that hall of heroes that I have, there are three prominent Peters in that room. One of them is Simon Peter, the apostle, the follower of Jesus. He's one of my heroes. Another one is Peter Sleeper, our executive pastor, someone who I have worked alongside of for almost 20 years. He's one of my heroes. But in that hall of heroes, with all of the glorious statues of historical figures and accomplished and famous and celebrated people, the person who rises above all the rest is my brother Peter. Not because he chose fame, but because he chose faithfulness. You see, I think this is what Philippians 4 is inviting us to consider. It is a starter kit for heroes. It is the checklist for faithfulness. It is to look for in others truthfulness and respectability and righteousness and purity and beauty and things that we can aspire to and admire. And above all else, as a sort of a catch-all, anything that is worthy of being celebrated and recognized and put onto a pedestal. See, the reality is who we identify as our heroes tells us more about ourselves than it does about them. It tells us that that's who we aspire to be. These are the things that inspire us. And this is my prayer today. My prayer is not that we would just go through the list and see if we could check these off or measure the people that we meet according to some unattainable standard. That we wouldn't see this sentence in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 as something to avoid, but something to celebrate, something to aspire to. But more than that, something to become. Because it's not enough to just have heroes. It's important to realize that we are all called to be heroes. I don't have that list anymore, but when I did have that 3x5 list of my preferred dinner guests, there was a name that I actually only ever had to take one name off because I actually had dinner with that person. The person whose name was on that list for many years was Roger Staubach. And I was living in Richardson, Texas, and just as it so happened, Roger Staubach's best friend from the Navy, a pilot that he met after he got out of the Naval Academy, his best friend was named Tom, and Tom and his wife and his two sons were members of my church in Richardson. And Roger and Tom had bought houses next to each other. And those legendary, if you ever heard of Roger Staubach's pickup basketball games, and his driveway, they were true. I was there. I played in those games. Roger Staubach had pickup basketball games with NBA players. And here's Dave, just, But I touched his Heisman Trophy. I touched it. I actually had dinner with Roger Staubach and his wife. When Tom's wife died, there were 3 people in the room with her, me and Tom and Roger. He remains one of my heroes because he is as advertised. And even though I don't keep that list anymore, I imagine there's a couple people I would love to have dinner with. Can you imagine having dinner with like Bono and Bob Dylan? How bizarre would that be? What an amazing time. I wouldn't have to say anything. I'd say, Bob, Bono, Bob, and just listen. Because these are the people that I admire. They inspire me in that hall of heroes, on those pedestals and on those trophies and plaques, are the people who I aspire to be like. The question isn't really who are your heroes? The question is, are you worth being a hero? We all have heroes. The real question is, whose hero are you? Be a hero. See, the bottom line, finally, brothers and sisters, is whatever is true, whatever is respectable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is worthy of outstanding recognition, think about such things.